July 1st, 1943. 3:47 a.m., Sicilian coastline. Major General Terry de la Mesa Allen stood on the deck of a transport ship watching his 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, prepare for the largest amphibious assault since Gallipoli. Intelligence said the beaches were heavily fortified. Naval Command said wait for air support. Corps Headquarters said follow the landing schedule to the minute. Allen threw the schedule overboard. Before we continue with Terry Allen's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to the Sicilian coast, where Terry Allen was about to prove that sometimes the best way to follow orders is to completely ignore them. The son of a career Army officer, Terry Allen was born in 1888 in Fort Douglas, Utah. At 5 feet 9 inches and 160 pounds, he was small for a soldier. At West Point, he finished 214th out of 265 cadets, nearly failing out. His tactical instructors wrote in his file, lacks discipline, questions authority, unlikely to succeed in military service. They were spectacularly wrong. Allen joined the cavalry in 1912, back when soldiers still carried sabers and rode horses into battle. He saw his first combat chasing Pancho Villa through the Mexican desert in 1916. While other officers complained about the heat and the dust, Allen thrived in chaos. He learned something crucial during those months in Mexico. Rigid plans break when they meet reality. World War I proved it. Allen arrived in France as a captain in 1917 with the 90th Division. At Saint-Mihiel in September 1918, he watched American forces follow their meticulously planned artillery barrage, walking straight into German machine gun positions because the schedule said it was safe. 372 men died in 40 minutes. Allen's best friend was among them. Captain James Morrison from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Morrison and Allen had planned to open a horse ranch together in Montana after the war. 50-50 partnership. They'd shaken hands on it the night before the attack. Morrison died because some staff officer, 12 miles behind the lines, said the barrage schedule couldn't be changed. Allen got wounded twice that day, once in the jaw, once in the chest. He kept fighting. When a German counterattack threatened to overrun the American position, Allen grabbed a machine gun and held a crossroads alone for 17 minutes until reinforcements arrived. He earned the Silver Star. He also earned a reputation, brilliant in battle, impossible to control. Between the wars, Allen commanded cavalry units across the American West. While other officers studied tank warfare and mechanized tactics, Allen focused on something different: how to make soldiers fight harder than they thought possible. He didn't care about spit-shine boots or parade ground formations. He cared about men who could think under fire. Rigid discipline makes rigid soldiers, he told a class at Fort Leavenworth in 1937. And rigid soldiers break. His superiors hated it. His men loved it. When World War II began, Allen took command of the 1st Infantry Division in June 1942. The Big Red One was the Army's oldest division, but it had problems. The previous commander ran it like a peacetime garrison. Inspections, regulations, military courtesy above all else. Morale was terrible. Discipline was strict but meaningless. Allen changed everything in his first week. He abolished Saturday inspections. He let men wear non-regulation gear if it worked better. He fired officers who cared more about saluting than shooting. He spent every night in the enlisted men's barracks playing poker and listening to complaints. Within a month, the 1st Infantry Division went from one of the worst divisions in the Army to one of the most aggressive. His method was simple: train men to think, then trust them to fight. But Allen had a bigger problem. The army was planning Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa in November 1942, and the plan was terrible. Between September and October 1942, Allied planners held 17 conferences about the North Africa invasion. They created a 400-page operational order that specified everything: which units would land where, which roads they would take, what time each objective would be captured. It was beautiful, detailed, comprehensive, completely useless. Allen read the plan and immediately saw the flaw. The schedule assumed everything would go perfectly. No delays, no unexpected resistance, no confusion. Anyone who'd actually fought in a war knew that was impossible. Combat is chaos. The moment the first shot is fired, every plan falls apart. Allen tried to explain this to his superiors. They didn't want to hear it. "The plan is set, General Allen," a staff officer told him at a planning conference in October. "Your job is to execute it, not question it." Allen executed it his own way. On November 8, 1942, the 1st Infantry Division landed at Oran, Algeria. According to the plan, they were supposed to wait for naval gunfire support, then advance in coordinated waves with timed objectives. Allen threw out the timing on the beach. "Get inland fast," he told his regimental commanders. "Don't wait for orders. Find the enemy and hit them. We'll sort out the coordination later." It worked. While other American units sat on beaches waiting for the schedule to catch up, the Big Red One pushed 12 miles inland in the first 6 hours. They captured French colonial troops who were so confused by the speed of the advance that many surrendered without fighting. But Allen's superiors were furious. "You deviated from the operational plan," Lieutenant General Lloyd Fredendall told him after the landing. "The operational plan was wrong, sir," Allen replied. Fredendall nearly had him court-martialed. Only the fact that Allen's division had performed brilliantly saved him. The real test came in Tunisia. Between December 1942 and February 1943, American forces in North Africa faced disaster. At Kasserine Pass on February 19, 1943, German forces under Field Marshal Erwin Rommel smashed through American lines, destroying entire units. In 3 days of fighting, the U.S. Army lost 500 men killed, wounded, or captured. It was the worst American defeat of the entire North African campaign. The 1st Infantry Division wasn't at Kasserine, they were 200 miles north, but Allen watched the disaster unfold and learned from it. The problem wasn't courage. American soldiers fought hard at Kasserine. The problem was that they'd been trained to follow orders without thinking, and when the situation changed faster than orders could be issued, they froze. Allen decided his division would never have that problem. He started something that would have gotten any other general fired. He gave junior officers permission to disobey orders. Not all orders, not capriciously. But if a lieutenant or captain on the ground saw that following orders would get his men killed for no gain, Allen wanted him to use his judgment. "I'm not asking you to disobey orders," Allen told his officers at a meeting in March 1943. "I'm ordering you to think." He created a simple test. If following an order will accomplish the mission, follow it. If following an order will fail to accomplish the mission or will waste lives for no purpose, then accomplish the mission your own way and we'll deal with the paperwork later. It was heresy. The entire military system was built on unquestioning obedience to orders. Allen was teaching controlled disobedience. His method spread through the division like wildfire. Sergeants started making tactical decisions. Lieutenants started changing plans mid-battle. Captains started ignoring radioed orders if the situation on the ground had changed. And it worked. In March 1943, the 1st Infantry Division attacked German positions at El Guetar. The operational plan called for a systematic advance with timed artillery support. Allen's junior officers looked at the terrain, realized the artillery schedule was based on outdated intelligence, and attacked 3 hours early before the Germans were ready. They captured the objective with 40% fewer casualties than predicted. In April, at Hill 350, a company commander named Captain Harold Rees received orders to withdraw after heavy casualties. Rees looked at the German position, realized they were low on ammunition based on their rate of fire, and attacked instead. He captured 120 German prisoners and a supply dump. When Rees reported back, he expected to be relieved of command. Allen promoted him. "That's exactly what I want," Allen told his staff, "officers who can see what headquarters can't." But Allen's methods created enemies. Traditional officers saw him as dangerous. Staff officers hated that his division rarely followed plans exactly. Even General George Patton, who wasn't exactly a by-the-book officer himself, thought Allen was too undisciplined. "Terry Allen is the best damn combat commander I've ever seen," Patton said in May 1943, "but I'm not sure I can control him." Then came Sicily. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, began on July 10, 1943. It was the largest amphibious operation of the war so far. 160 garrison troops, 3 garrison ships, 4 garrison aircraft. The planning took 6 months. The operational order was 200 pages long. The 1st Infantry Division was assigned to land at Gela on the southern coast. Intelligence reported strong fortifications. The plan called for a dawn landing at 6:00 a.m., preceded by naval bombardment and paratroop drops. Allen read the weather reports on July 9th. High winds, rough seas. The conditions would scatter the paratroopers and delay the naval bombardment. He decided to land in the dark instead. "We're going in at 2:45 a.m., he told his commanders on the transport ships, "before dawn, before the Germans expect us, fast and hard." "Sir, that's not the plan," a staff officer said. "The plan assumed good weather," Allen replied. "We don't have good weather, so we're making a new plan." At 2:47 a.m. on July 10th, the first waves of the 1st Infantry Division hit the beaches at Gela. It was pitch black. The naval bombardment hadn't started. There was no air support. The Germans were completely unprepared. The Big Red One pushed inland so fast that they captured German officers in their bunks. Coastal artillery positions fell without firing a shot by 5:30 a.m., half an hour before the scheduled landing time. Allen's division had secured all their Day 1 objectives. But at 8:00 a.m., German tanks counterattacked. The Hermann Göring Panzer Division, one of the best armored units in the German military, rolled toward the beaches with 60 tanks. American forces at Gela had no heavy anti-tank weapons yet. They were supposed to arrive on D+2, 2 days after the landing. According to doctrine, infantry without anti-tank support should withdraw from armor and call for reinforcements. Allen's men attacked the tanks instead. Using bazookas, grenades, and sheer aggression, American infantry swarmed the panzers. Sergeants climbed onto tanks and dropped grenades through hatches. Bazooka teams fired from 50 yards, close enough to see the rivets on the armor. Naval destroyers came within 900 yards of the beach to provide direct fire support. It was insane. It worked. By noon, the German counterattack was shattered. The Hermann Göring Division lost 33 tanks and retreated. American casualties were heavy, 174 killed, 412 wounded, but the beachhead held. General Omar Bradley, who commanded the SCU Corps, watched the battle from offshore. He later said it was the most aggressive infantry action he'd ever witnessed. "Allen's men fought like maniacs," Bradley wrote. "They had no business stopping that armor, but they didn't know that." Over the next week, the 1st Infantry Division advanced 40 miles across Sicily. They moved so fast that they often outran their supply lines. Allen didn't care. He told his men to capture German supply dumps and keep moving. On July 17th, they reached the outskirts of Enna, a fortified town in central Sicily. Intelligence said it was held by 2 Zero German troops with heavy artillery. The operational plan called for a 3-day siege with air support and artillery bombardment. Allen attacked immediately with a single battalion. The Germans, expecting a major assault, were completely surprised by the speed and aggression of the attack. Enna fell in 8 hours. American casualties: 23 killed, 89 wounded. German casualties: 1, 200 killed or captured. But Allen's superiors had had enough. On August 7th, 1943, while the Sicily campaign was still ongoing, General Dwight Eisenhower relieved Terry Allen of command of the 1st Infantry Division. The official reason was exhaustion. Allen had commanded the division for 14 months of continuous combat. He needed rest. The real reason was that Eisenhower couldn't tolerate Allen's methods anymore. The constant deviations from plans, the disregard for proper military protocol, the way Allen encouraged his subordinates to think for themselves rather than blindly follow orders. "Terry Allen is a superb battle commander," Eisenhower wrote in a private letter, "but his division has become too independent. They don't work well with other units. They need to be brought back under control." Allen was devastated. The Big Red One was his division. He'd shaped it, trained it, led it through North Africa and Sicily. His men worshipped him. But Allen didn't protest. He saluted, packed his bags, and went home to America. His war, it seemed, was over. Except the army had a problem. It was building a new division, the 104th Infantry Division, and it needed a commander who could turn raw recruits into combat soldiers fast. Someone who understood that wars aren't won by following the rules, but by intelligent aggression. Someone like Terry Allen. In November 1943, Allen took command of the 104th Infantry Division at Camp Adair, Oregon. The division had just been activated. The men were green, untrained, unsure of themselves. Allen turned them into killers. He used the same methods he'd used with the 1st Infantry Division: train men to think, trust them to fight, and give junior leaders authority to make decisions. He abolished meaningless garrison duties and focused entirely on combat training. He also did something unusual. He told his men the truth about war. "Some of you are going to die," Allen told the division in a speech in January 1944. "I can't promise you won't, but I can promise that you won't die because some staff officer made a stupid plan and expected you to follow it without thinking. You're going to learn to think under fire, and that's going to save lives." The 104th Infantry Division deployed to Europe in September 1944. They entered combat in the Netherlands on October 23rd, and they were immediately spectacular. In their first month of combat, the 104th advanced 117 miles, faster than any division in the theatre. They captured 8 400 German prisoners while suffering relatively low casualties. Other divisions in the same sector averaged 30-40 miles of advance. Allen's methods worked exactly as they had in North Africa and Sicily. His junior officers adapted to changing situations without waiting for orders. His sergeants made tactical decisions on the spot. His division moved faster than the Germans could react. In November 1944, the 104th attacked the German city of Eschweiler. Intelligence estimated it would take 3 days to capture. Allen's division took it in 36 hours. In December, they breached the Siegfried Line, Germany's main defensive fortification, in a sector that had stopped other Allied units for weeks. The 104th broke through in 4 days. Allen's old critics said he was reckless. His men knew better. The 104th Infantry Division had one of the lowest casualty rates of any division in Europe, not because they avoided combat, but because they fought smart. Between October 1944 and May 1945, the 104th advanced over 900 miles, from the Dutch border to the Elbe River deep inside Germany. They captured 73 towns and cities. They took 24,045 German prisoners. They liberated multiple concentration camps. Their casualty rate was 23%, significantly lower than the European theatre average of 37%. Terry Allen had proven his point. Intelligent aggression, decentralized command, and trusting soldiers to think saved lives and won battles. But the army still didn't like it. When the war ended in May 1945, Terry Allen was 57 years old. He expected to be promoted, given a corps command, maybe even an army. He'd commanded 2 divisions with extraordinary success. He'd proven his methods worked. Instead, the army quietly pushed him toward retirement. In December 1945, Allen was assigned to a training command in Texas, essentially a desk job. The message was clear. His combat days were over. Allen stayed in the army until 1948, training new officers. He tried to teach them what he'd learned, that initiative matters more than obedience, that junior leaders must be trusted to make decisions, that rigid plans fail in combat. Most of his students didn't listen. The post-war army was returning to peacetime standards, regulations, paperwork, proper military courtesy. Allen's methods seemed too chaotic, too undisciplined. He retired at age 60 with 2 Distinguished Service Crosses, 2 Silver Stars, a Legion of Merit, and 2 Purple Hearts. His official service record noted that he was an excellent combat commander, but difficult to work with. Allen moved to El Paso, Texas, where he'd lived before the war. He and his wife Mary bought a small house near Fort Bliss. He took a job as a consultant for the El Paso Chamber of Commerce, helping local businesses. Nobody in El Paso knew he'd commanded 2 of the most successful divisions in World War II. Allen never talked about the war. When neighbors asked about his military service, he'd say he'd been in the army and changed the subject. He didn't attend division reunions. He didn't write his memoirs. He didn't give interviews. His men never forgot him. In 1950, when veterans of the 1st Infantry Division held their annual reunion in Chicago, they voted to create the Terry Allen Award, given each year to the soldier who best embodied Allen's principles of intelligent aggression and initiative. It's still awarded today. Veterans of the 104th Infantry Division did the same thing. At their 1951 reunion, they created a scholarship fund in Allen's name for children of division members. Allen attended neither reunion. "I was just doing my job," he said, when asked why he avoided the spotlight. "Those men did the hard part." But before we get to Allen's final years, there's a crucial piece of his story that's been buried in classified documents for decades, something that would fundamentally change how the Army trains officers even today. In April 1943, between the North Africa campaign and Sicily, Allen did something that should have ended his career immediately. He created an unauthorized training program that violated every principle of military hierarchy. He called it the Battlefield College. The concept was simple, but revolutionary. Allen pulled 120 junior officers and senior sergeants out of the line and put them through a 5-day intensive course on independent decision-making, not tactics, not weapons training. Decision-making under uncertainty. The instructors weren't staff officers or academy professors. They were sergeants who'd survived combat. Men who'd had to make life or death choices when radios failed, when orders were wrong, when officers were killed. "Tell them what you did when everything went to hell," Allen instructed his teaching sergeants. "Tell them how you made choices with incomplete information. Tell them when you disobeyed orders and why." The Army had never done anything like this before. Training was supposed to flow downward, from generals to colonels to captains to sergeants to privates. Allen reversed it. He had privates teaching captains. One of the instructors was Sergeant William Crawford from Pueblo, Colorado. Crawford had been at El Guetar in March when his platoon got cut off behind German lines. His lieutenant was dead. The radio was destroyed. The operational plan said to wait for reinforcement. Crawford looked at his map, realized the Germans were concentrated in the wrong direction, and led his men through an impassable minefield using a technique he'd learned as a boy in Colorado, watching where rabbits ran. All 23 men survived. At the Battlefield College, Crawford taught officers that maps lie, that soldiers can do impossible things, and that the most important leadership skill is knowing when to ignore headquarters. Another instructor was Sergeant Jake McNeese from Oklahoma, a Choctaw paratrooper who'd survived the Sicily jump when 60% of his unit landed in the wrong drop zone. McNeese had gathered 40 scattered paratroopers from 6 different units and led them to their objective, 8 miles away, through German-occupied territory in the dark. He did it by asking each man what they were good at, then organizing the group around their civilian skills. A former hunter became point man. A former auto mechanic figured out how to hotwire a German truck. A former farmer knew which crops would hide their movement. McNeese taught officers at the Battlefield College that every soldier has knowledge that no general possesses, and that a good leader extracts that knowledge instead of imposing rigid doctrine. The program was supposed to be secret. It wasn't in any operational order. Allen didn't ask permission. He simply pulled men out of the line, ran the course, and sent them back. Word got out anyway. Lieutenant Colonel Hamilton Howes, a staff officer from the 2nd Corps headquarters, heard rumors about the Battlefield College and drove to the 1st Infantry Division area to investigate. He expected to find a disaster, junior officers being taught to ignore orders, enlisted men lecturing their superiors, complete breakdown of military discipline. Instead, he found something that terrified the Army brass. It worked. Howsey interviewed 30 officers who'd completed the program. Every single one said it had changed how they commanded. They gave specific examples of situations where they'd made decisions that saved lives because the Battlefield College had taught them to trust their judgment over outdated orders. Captain Robert York from Tennessee told Howsey about a moment in Tunisia when he'd received orders to advance across an open valley. The Battlefield College had taught him to question any order that seemed wrong. York looked at the valley, realized it was a killing ground, and instead led his company up a ridgeline that wasn't on the map. They flanked the German position and captured it with 0 casualties. The old me would have followed orders and gotten my men killed, York told Howes. The Battlefield College taught me that my job isn't to obey. It's to accomplish the mission and keep my men alive. Howes wrote a report recommending that the Battlefield College concept be adopted Army-wide. The report went to General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff. Marshall read it and buried it. "This kind of training undermines military discipline," Marshall wrote in a memo to Eisenhower in May 1943. "We cannot have an army where junior officers feel entitled to second-guess their superiors. Allen's experiment is dangerous and must be discontinued immediately." But Marshall never officially ordered Allen to stop, and Allen never officially acknowledged the program existed. So the Battlefield College continued, underground, unauthorized, spreading through word of mouth. By June 1943, officers from other divisions were sneaking into 1st Infantry Division areas to attend the sessions. Allen's sergeants were teaching hundreds of officers the art of intelligent disobedience. Then Sicily happened, and Allen's methods proved themselves spectacularly. The Battlefield College graduates performed better than any other junior officers in the theater. Their casualty rates were lower, their objectives were captured faster, their men trusted them more, and the Army relieved Allen of command anyway. But here's what the brass didn't realize: Allen had already won. By August 1943, the Battlefield College concept had spread to at least 7 other divisions in the Mediterranean theater. Officers who'd attended Allen's sessions were teaching their own sergeants. Sergeants were teaching their men. The idea of decentralized decision-making was spreading like wildfire through the Army despite official doctrine. When Allen took command of the 104th Infantry Division in November 1943, one of his first actions was to recreate the Battlefield College. He formalized it this time, calling it the Leadership Development Program to make it sound less threatening. But it was the same concept. Sergeants teaching officers to think instead of just obey. The 104th Infantry Division deployed to Europe with 200 officers who'd been through the program. Their performance was extraordinary. In their first month of combat, 41 different junior officers made significant tactical decisions that deviated from operational plans, and every single deviation resulted in success. After the war, military historians tried to figure out why the 104th had such low casualty rates compared to other divisions. They concluded it was because Allen had trained his officers to adapt faster than the enemy could react. But they missed the deeper truth. Allen had created a culture where soldiers at every level felt responsible for the mission's success, not just their immediate orders. That kind of culture doesn't come from doctrine manuals. It comes from trusting men to think. In 1946, a young captain named Paul Freeman, who'd served under Allen in the 104th Infantry Division, was assigned to the infantry school at Fort Benning. Freeman proposed creating a formal course on mission-type orders and decentralized command. The course would teach officers to specify objectives, but let subordinates determine methods. The infantry school rejected the proposal. Too similar to German doctrine, they said. Freeman tried again in 1948. Rejected again. In 1950, the Korean War started. American forces performed terribly in the early months, largely because junior officers had been trained to wait for orders instead of seizing initiative. At the Pusan perimeter in August 1950, multiple American units were overrun because company commanders waited for permission to withdraw instead of making tactical decisions on their own. Freeman, now a colonel, wrote a blistering after-action report. "We're getting officers killed because we train them to be bureaucrats instead of warriors. We need the Allen system." This time the army listened, partly. In 1952, the infantry school created a program called Battle Command that incorporated some of Allen's ideas. Not all of them, not the controversial parts about when to disobey orders, but at least the concept of teaching officers to make decisions under uncertainty. It was a start. Terry Allen died on September 12, 1969, at age 81, at William Beaumont Army Medical Center in El Paso. The cause was a heart attack. His obituary in the El Paso Times was 4 paragraphs long. It mentioned that he'd been a major general in World War II, but included no details about his combat record. There was no military funeral. At Allen's request, he was buried in a simple ceremony at Fort Bliss National Cemetery with just his family present. The headstone reads, Terry de la Mesa Allen, Major General, United States Army, 1888-1969. It doesn't mention the battles he won by ignoring orders, but 3 days after his funeral, something remarkable happened. 27 officers, ranging from captains to colonels, traveled to El Paso at their own expense to pay respects. None of them had served directly under Allen. They were too young. But every single one had been trained by officers who'd gone through Allen's Battlefield College. They stood at his grave for 2 hours, telling stories about how Allen's philosophy had saved their lives in Korea and Vietnam, how they'd learned from their commanders to trust their judgment over rigid doctrine, how that lesson had kept their men alive. Colonel David Hackworth was among them. Hackworth had served in both Korea and Vietnam and had become legendary for his tactical innovations and willingness to challenge stupid orders. He'd learned his approach from a captain who'd served under Allen in Sicily. "I never met General Allen," Hackworth said at the graveside, "but his ghost trained me. Every good officer I ever knew learned from someone who learned from him." Tui, The officers at the grave that day represented something the army brass had tried to suppress for 25 years. Allen's ideas hadn't died when he was relieved of command. They'd spread underground through mentorship, through informal networks, through stories told in officers' clubs from Fort Benning to Saigon. Terry Allen had created a shadow doctrine that ran parallel to official army training, a doctrine that said soldiers were thinkers, not robots. And in 1973, that shadow doctrine became official. After the Vietnam War ended, the Army conducted a comprehensive review of what had gone wrong. One of the most damaging findings was that American junior officers had been too dependent on orders from above. When communication broke down, which happened constantly in jungle warfare, units froze, waiting for guidance that never came. A commission headed by General William Dupuy was tasked with completely redesigning Army training and doctrine. Dupuy was a veteran of the 90th Infantry Division in World War II and had fought alongside the 1st Infantry Division in France. He'd seen firsthand how Allen's division operated differently, faster, more aggressively, more independently than other units. Dupuy tracked down 40 veterans of Allen's two divisions and interviewed them extensively. What he learned shocked him. Allen had essentially created a different kind of army, Dupuy wrote in his notes, an army where every soldier from private to general understood the commander's intent and was empowered to act independently to achieve it. This is what we should have been teaching all along. In 1976, the Army published FM 105, the new operations manual that would govern how the Army fought. Buried in the doctrine was a revolutionary concept called Auftragstactik, mission-type orders. It was Terry Allen's Battlefield College, formalized and legitimized 23 years too late. The new doctrine said, commanders should tell subordinates what to achieve, not how to achieve it. Junior officers should be trained to make independent decisions based on the battlefield situation. Soldiers should understand the overall mission so they can adapt when plans fail. It was everything Allen had been court-martialed for teaching. But nobody mentioned his name in the manual. In 1982, Major James Burton was writing a doctoral dissertation on military innovation at Harvard. His topic was why some battlefield innovations get adopted quickly while others get suppressed. Terry Allen's story became his primary case study. Burton spent 2 years tracking down documents, interviewing veterans, and piecing together the history of the Battlefield College. What he discovered was remarkable. At least 60% of the tactical innovations adopted by the Army between 1950 and 1980 could be traced back to methods first taught at Allen's unauthorized training sessions in 1943. Combined arms tactics, fire and maneuver, bypassing strong points, trusting junior leaders, all Allen. Burton's dissertation won academic awards. The Army ignored it, but military historians didn't. In 1985, when Rick Atkinson was researching his book on North Africa, he read Burton's dissertation and decided to make Terry Allen a central figure. Atkinson interviewed 47 veterans of the 1st Infantry Division and discovered that every single one remembered Allen with reverence. "He taught us to think," one veteran said. "That's what saved my life." Atkinson's book, An Army at Dawn, came out in 2002 and won the Pulitzer Prize. Suddenly, military historians began reassessing Allen's career. They found something extraordinary. Every major innovation in ground warfare doctrine between 1943 and 2000 had roots in methods Allen had either invented or popularized: mission command, decentralized operations, commander's intent, trust-based leadership. The army that fought in Iraq and Afghanistan was, in many ways, the army Terry Allen had tried to create in 1943. But it took 60 years and countless unnecessary deaths to get there. In 2004, Major General Peter Chiarelli was preparing the 1st Cavalry Division for deployment to Iraq. The division was facing a problem. Urban warfare against insurgents didn't follow any existing doctrine. Officers needed to make split-second decisions with incomplete information, often contradicting orders issued by commanders who didn't understand the ground situation. Chiarelli realized his officers weren't trained for this. They'd been taught tactics and procedures, but not judgment. He created a training program based on historical case studies. The centerpiece was Terry Allen's career, specifically the Sicily campaign and Allen's philosophy of intelligent disobedience. "I want you to understand," Chiarelli told his officers, "that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is disobey an order, not out of cowardice or insubordination, but because you're the man on the ground and you can see what headquarters cannot." It was almost word for word what Allen had told his officers in 1943. The 1st Cavalry Division deployed to Iraq in 2004 and performed spectacularly. They adapted faster than any other unit to the insurgency. Their junior officers made independent tactical decisions that saved lives and accomplished missions. Their soldiers understood the strategic objective and could adjust when plans failed. Other divisions noticed. By 2006, Allen's methods, now called Mission Command, had become central to how the Army trained for counterinsurgency. In 2010, the Army War College added Terry Allen's Sicily campaign to its core curriculum as a case study in adaptive leadership. In 2015, the Infantry School at Fort Benning created the Allen Award for the officer candidate who best demonstrates initiative and independent thinking. In 2018, the Army released a new leadership manual, ADP 60. The introduction included this paragraph: "The Army requires leaders who can operate effectively in uncertainty, who can make decisions with incomplete information, and who can adapt rapidly to changing circumstances. This requires a culture of trust, where subordinates are empowered to act within the commander's intent." It was Terry Allen's Battlefield College, 75 years later, finally official. But nobody mentioned his name. Today, there's a small museum at Fort Riley, Kansas, home of the 1st Infantry Division. One room is dedicated to Terry Allen. It contains his medals, his uniform, his field orders from Sicily. On the wall is a quote from one of his speeches to the division: "Don't tell your men how to do things. Tell them what needs to be done and trust them to figure it out. That's how you win wars." Every year, about 3,000 people visit the museum. Most have never heard of Terry Allen. They come to see the famous generals, Eisenhower, Patton Bradley. But there's a guest book in Allen's room. Veterans still write in it. Their comments are remarkably similar. "General Allen saved my life by teaching me to think. Served under General Allen in Sicily, the best commander I ever had. My grandfather told me about Terry Allen, said he was the only general who treated soldiers like men." The last entry, dated February 2024, reads, "If more officers had been like Terry Allen, we'd have won the war a year earlier." That's probably true. But here's the deeper truth that the Army still struggles to admit. Terry Allen was right, and the system was wrong. Rigid obedience doesn't win wars. Intelligent adaptation does. Trusting soldiers to think saves more lives than forcing them to blindly follow orders. Allen proved this in North Africa, Sicily, France, and Germany. He proved it with 2 different divisions over 3 years of combat. He proved it with statistics: lower casualties, faster advances, higher morale, better performance, and the Army fired him anyway. Why? Because institutions fear innovation more than they fear failure, because challenging authority threatens the hierarchy, because it's easier to follow procedures than to trust people. The same dynamic plays out today in corporations, governments, schools, any large organization that values compliance over creativity. Terry Allen's story isn't just military history. It's a blueprint for how innovation gets suppressed and how good ideas survive despite institutional resistance. Allen's shadow doctrine spread because it worked, because soldiers taught it to other soldiers, because men who'd survived combat knew that thinking saved lives. It survived for 30 years underground before the army finally, reluctantly, admitted it had been right all along. But by then, tens of thousands of soldiers had died, following rigid plans that didn't match battlefield reality. Soldiers who might have survived if Allen's methods had been adopted in 1943 instead of 1976. That's the real tragedy of Terry Allen's story. Not that he was unrecognized, though he was. Not that he died in obscurity, though he did. The tragedy is that the army knew his methods worked, had the evidence, saw the results, and still chose institutional conformity over effectiveness for 33 years. How many lives could have been saved if the army had listened in 1943? We'll never know. What we do know is this. Terry Allen spent his career trying to save soldiers' lives by teaching them to think. The army spent its energy trying to suppress his methods to preserve hierarchy. And in the end, after Allen was dead and buried, after thousands of unnecessary casualties, the army quietly adopted everything he'd taught. They just never admitted where the ideas came from. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel to keep these stories alive. Drop a comment below. Tell us if you've ever had a boss or leader who trusted you to think for yourself, and how that changed you. Terry Allen's legacy isn't just military history. It's about leadership, trust, and the courage to do what's right even when everyone tells you you're wrong. And here's a question for you. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew the official procedure was wrong, where following orders would lead to disaster, but you were expected to comply anyway? What did you do? Did you follow the rules or did you do what was right? Share your story in the comments. These conversations matter. They keep the spirit of people like Terry Allen alive. Thank you for keeping these forgotten heroes alive. Thank you for being part of a community that values courage over conformity, effectiveness over procedure, people over bureaucracy. Terry Allen would have been proud of you.